Hello and welcome. My name's Pilita Clark. I'm an Associate Editor at the Financial Times, and we're here at COP28 in Dubai in our FT Experts Corner with a real expert, Greg Jackson, who is the founder and chief executive of Octopus Energy, which did not even exist in 2015 but has grown to be the UK's second largest energy supplier. Welcome, Greg.
Thank you for having me. It's an absolute pleasure to be here.
Tell me, this is an inane question that everybody asks at COP. How's your COP been so far?
I tell you what, for those who are kind of listening, COP has got two major zones, the blue zone and the green zone. Blue is where governments and a lot of the media are, and green is where businesses are. And you spend an awful lot of time shuttling between the two. So I think my first day here, I did over 30,000 steps.
No way. 30? That is, okay, that's the record I've heard so far. Yep. It's really, I mean, I've done about 12, which I thought was pretty good. So this is your second COP?
Second COP. I was in Glasgow as well.
Glasgow as well, right. And so how does this one compare?
Look, this one's huge. And I think the interesting thing I get asked a lot about is it right that there are so many businesses here, even people doing deals? I think fundamentally, while a lot of the policymakers and negotiators are working through the plans that COP might be able to agree to, they also need the confidence that it can be delivered. And a lot of the delivery is down to private companies. So as COP really does focus on delivering, so this presence of business is important. I really hope that we can help those policymakers understand that the path to net zero can be cheaper and faster than perhaps a lot of them have thought. Yeah,
that's a really interesting point, because of course there are businesses and businesses here. I mean, do you feel as though you're getting your message across, getting that message across to the policymakers who are here, be they officials, ministers, heads of state or whatever?
There's a couple of things that have really struck me. I think the first is that I'm hearing things I haven't heard before, that electrification is the key. And that's really important. We can talk all we like about what's going to happen with fossil fuels, but the reality is net zero is about electrifying everything we can. And that's building a whole new energy system, fundamentally based around things like renewables. I think the second thing I'm beginning to hear, which actually I take as a positive, is some of the fossil fuel companies kind of admitting that they can't do this.
Who's admitted that?
Yeah, for example, Exxon's chief executive said, look, there's too much talk on renewables.
Actually, that was our story. One of my colleagues, Amy Williams, interviewed him, and he said that COPs had been focusing on renewables for too long, and they needed to look more at hydrogen, carbon capture and storage, other technologies that essentially are better for oil and gas companies.
And the whole thing here is, it's not about what's good for different companies. It's about building this new clean energy system. And that will be built around electricity. Now, that electricity can come from renewables, it can come from, fossil fuels, as long as they're capturing their carbon. But I think kind of experts will often look at this and say, hang on, today, renewables are already cheaper than fossil fuels in most parts of the world. And if you're going to add the additional cost of carbon capture and storage, then renewables only get even more cheaper. So I think once we start having this kind of conversation that electrification is the answer, and then we have competition between different ways of bringing the electricity to the market, actually we'll get a transition to a clean system that's faster, it's cheaper, and doesn't have as much greenwash.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting that one of the big announcements that's been made at the COP, there's more than 100 countries have committed to tripling renewable energy capacity by 2030. Is that going to make any real difference to a company like Octopus Energy?
Look, if it helps create the policy landscape, for example, if countries can make it easier to give the permits to build the renewable generation, that will make a huge difference. Similarly, in many countries we're constrained by grids. If it helps unlock those constraints so we can bring this cheap power faster, then it will make a difference. But I think the demand side is going to be critical. And often, these big conferences, that plays second fiddle to the huge numbers and commitments around investment, which of course is critical. But the iPhone kind of drove demand for wireless signals, wireless masts and infrastructure to be able to carry all that mobile data. And in the same way, recognizing that when a household gets an electric vehicle, they double their electricity consumption. And by the way, if they're using smart tariffs on a smart grid, it'll be the cheapest driving they've ever had, and will keep getting cheaper. And so what we need now is to understand that actually by offering these products and services to consumers that can only come in a cheap electricity world, we'll get consumers helping push this as well.
Yeah. Now, one thing, I mean, Octopus has a pavilion in the green zone, which, as you mentioned, is where all the businesses are doing business and have their own stalls, pavilions and whatever. But also, you've built some wind turbines at the entrance of the COP. Now, how did you do that, and how long did it take you to put them up, and do they really work? Are they actually connected?
So, they really work. We built them in 3 weeks.
You put them
3
up
weeks.
Okay, to give people a sense of how big they are.
We just want to, they're 28 meters, right? And what we wanted to show is that renewables can be built incredibly quickly if we're given permission. And that's why this question about permitting and grid connections is so important. And actually, these turbines, they're really destined for Sierra Leone. They're stopping here on the way to demonstrate just how quick and easy it is to build them.
And this is the deal that you've done with a charity that involves Idris Elba, one of my favourite actors. Is that right?
Yeah, so Idris Elba's of Sierra Leonean heritage. And I think like so many people, he wants to help give something back to the communities he feels close to.
And so what are you actually doing? You're building, the first wind farm in Sierra Leone, is it?
Yeah, it's the first wind farm in Sierra Leone. Also, there'll be a load of solar and batteries. And really, what we're trying to show is that by building community-based mini-grids, we can start to bring cheap, very, very cheap, clean energy to communities which don't have energy at all, or where they get it from dirty diesel generators that are intermittent as well as being filthy and expensive, or from chopping down trees and making charcoal. There are 600 million people in Africa that don't have access to grid electricity. And so what we want to do here is create approaches that can be rolled very quickly so we don't have to wait for the big grid infrastructure.
Yeah. And what's the capacity of the wind and solar that you're putting into Sierra Leone in megawatts?
Yeah, it'll do a few thousand homes.
Right. So it's quite small.
It's small, but the point here is everyone at a place like COP is obsessed with big numbers. But then you've got a real delivery problem. And at the end of the day, if we can bring 1,000 projects like this, we can really unlock.
But this is being funded by a charity? And
no, it's funded by us, right?
Well, hang on. You can't be funding all... Your investors are not going to be... Even in the best of all possible worlds, you might be able to do a few, but they're not going to be very happy if you start doing them all over the world, are they? These sorts of projects?
The point of this really is that if you look at a lot of small projects in continents like Africa, customers are paying, 70 cents for electricity. Even on a subsidized grid, it might be 10 cents.
Kilowatt hour.
Yeah, but using microgrids with very smart technology, we can get that down to a few cents per kilowatt hour at a commercially viable project. And so
So this one will be commercially viable, you think?
This will pathfind its way to commercial viability. The data we gather here on the way in which people use it is what's going to let us commercially roll out many, many more projects across Africa. And this is critical because there's a lot of talk of a just transition.
Yep.
We can't allow a just transition to be, the argument, the West had fossil fuels, so now developing countries should get them. We need to leapfrog past fossil fuels to a cheaper, better solution. In the same way that mobiles leapfrogged landlines and brought the internet and communications to the developing world.
I mean, that's exactly right. I mean, I've been in countless events and watched various panels and moderated various panels where exactly this conversation is had, and we see private sector people saying, just don't expect us to be filling this $5 trillion gap that we're talking about for the amount of money that needs to be invested in low carbon energy by 2050. But we're not, if private investors are behaving on behalf of loads of other people who need to make a return on their money, and so they have to be worried about risk, and they have to be worried about returns. And obviously you know all of this because that's what you spend your life doing. But realistically, I mean, is this project really going to be able to be a model for getting over these humps of the high cost of capital that we see throughout Africa, where it can cost 2, 3, 4, 5 times as much to get a loan as it does in an EU country, for example?
Yeah, look, we already see companies like Bbox, which is based between the UK and Rwanda. and operates in, I think, half a dozen countries. And on a commercial level, they provide solar panels on a pay-as-you-go basis to households that often didn't have any energy before. And what you start to do is unlock economic improvements. So once you've got solar panels, maybe you start to get a fridge,
right.
and you can buy food and keep it longer, improving the health, but also the economics of a household.
Yeah.
And then lights, so you can study and improve your education, charge a phone.
Yeah.
And then ultimately move on to be things like getting a small, a two-wheel electric vehicle. And I think this kind of ground level stuff, which can be economically viable, on a small scale, we can then start to really scale up.
Yeah, yeah. Now, speaking of scaling up, it seems that every time I look around, there's another RNS, another company announcement from Octopus Energy doing something else. If it's not these big wind farm funds that you've just announced, I think it was, what, 3 billion? I can't remember the size of the fund.
Yeah, the latest one's £3 billion.
That was the latest one. But you're just, you're doing so many things, whether it's heat pumps, electric car leasing, you're building these new wind farms. You haven't made a profit yet because you've made it very clear you want to grow. You want to get. But I don't understand what your ultimate vision is. What do you actually want to grow into?
Yeah, look, our ultimate vision is to create the cheapest, most efficient electrified society. That's how we're going to move to net zero fastest, and in a way that is good for citizens, taxpayers, voters, consumers, whatever, however we think about our population. And look, there was this great interview with Jeff Bezos, I think, in 1999, when the interviewer said to him, look, you're building warehouses. I thought you were an internet company. And he said, internet schminternet. We're a customer company. And if building warehouses will let us bring more products cheaper, faster to our customers, we'll do it. And I think, look, today, Amazon owns airlines for shipping goods around. It owns shipping lines. It owns warehouses and built AWS. And in the same way, if we're going to build a clean energy system that makes the best use of renewables while they're being generated, gives consumers the best experience, whether it be decarbonized heating through a heat pump or a decarbonized transport in an electric vehicle. All of this has to be done together, because otherwise we can't make it. We can't make advantage of things like the fact that renewables, at the point they're being generated, are the cheapest power we've ever had. So we really need to join consumption, generation, and everything in between.
So you want to be the Amazon of energy?
Well, I think Amazon's got a lot to show us about how you build an ecosystem. And I think one of the things that's held back, clean energy is the idea of the energy transition. The idea that the fossil fuel companies will change and will become the clean energy companies of the future. I'm sure some of them will. But, they're startups in the clean energy world. And so, like in any other sector, startups that have entered the market fresh, especially from a technology background, will be looking at this and trying to grow to scale solutions that might not have been imagined by the incumbents.
Yeah.
And the incumbents will use their assets, big balance sheets, some great people, the ability to make financial decisions. And they'll wrestle their way into this new world.
Do you think they should? It's a really interesting question that I debate a lot with my colleagues about whether the oil and gas companies, whether Exxon, Chevron, BP, Shell, should really be getting into electric cars, wind farms, solar farms. Do you think they should, or would they be better off taking a different approach to the energy transition?
We've seen many sectors go through technology transformations. We can think about the media sector. If we'd asked, the print media to design the internet, it wouldn't have looked like it does today. But most of the print media, media are now pretty successful in an internet world. So what you had was the early creators of kind of online media pioneering the way. Some publications moved to it very quickly. Others have found different paths. And in the same way, creating this new energy system, some of the incumbents, companies like Total are doing some tremendous stuff in renewables, whilst at the same time having their feet in the fossil fuel world as well. Others might struggle with it a bit. And some of the startups, not only us, but there are plenty who are finding ways to make the renewable system work for consumers.
Yeah. Now, you recently gave a really interesting interview with Desert Island Discs, and I just wondered before, we've only got a minute or so left. Number one, you said that at one point you flew from London on a Sunday evening, I think it was, to Tokyo, Yokohama, Sydney, Melbourne, and back to London by Wednesday so you could see your two boys. Is that, I mean, that seems to me incredible. Is that, but you actually, how often do you do that sort of thing?
Well, look, I mean, I think building a global business, you have to go and meet people. And of course, I use Zoom and Teams and WhatsApp whenever I can. I mean, it's a lot easier to do that than it is to travel.
Yeah.
But, for example, we have a phenomenal team in Tokyo. And, being in their world, with their customers, with them, with our investors, and really getting to know each other is important too.
Yeah.
But I think the challenge for anyone who wants to do a good job of, for example, being a parent and be able to build a global business is, at the end of the day, you have to make these really quite difficult, kind of personal journeys. And, even being here at COP, I was speaking to some really senior people who said they don't know how long they're going to be able to stay because of the pressure to go and do their part for their family back home. And I think, the reality is, in our private lives, we've all got to juggle stuff.
Absolutely, yeah.
And if we want to do extraordinary things at work, well, it just makes it a bit harder.
Very quickly, the other thing you said in that interview, which I thought was really interesting, was that you only thought about setting up an energy company after you got these monstrous energy bills and you rang up and said, is this right? And they said, oh no, we'll cut that. And that was one. And then the same thing happened the next year.
Yeah.
And so, is that true? Did you really just get the idea because you realised that basically people were getting a bit of a runaround from the energy companies?
And that was absolutely, definitely one of the key insights or experiences. I think on top of that, look, about a decade ago, energy companies were repeatedly blaming green taxes for high energy bills. Now, both my experience as a customer and my knowledge as a technologist was that underlying all of it, they just had terrible systems, and that forced them into having, really poor customer offerings, terrible service, very high operating costs, and they don't have the data agility to make the most of, for example, intermittent or variable renewables.
Yeah.
And so, what was obvious was that you could build a technology platform, a system. We did it, called Kraken, that could fix all of those problems. And today we license that around the world. A couple of years ago.
Including to your rivals, yeah.
Including to our rivals in the UK, EDF use it, and E.ON use it, and Good Energy.
Yeah.
And I think, this sector is so big that different parts of the value chain, you can compete with people or cooperate with them. And it's the only way we're going to kind of get to a cheap system, a clean system, quickly.
Yeah. Unfortunately, we've run out of time, but Greg Jackson, Octopus Energy Chief Executive, thank you very much for being here in Experts Corner today.
Thank you very much indeed.
Thank
it's been
you.
An absolute pleasure.